Discover how a retired black electrician's unexpected call revealed a billionaire's hidden crisis. George Thompson was savoring the stillness of a typical Atlanta morning when his phone's ringtone shattered the silence. The peal seemed oddly out of place, interrupting the melody of birdsong drifting through his open window. He glanced at the caller ID, Jonathan Reed. The name sent ripples of bewilderment across his mind. Why would a billionaire tech mogul be calling him a retired electrician? As he hesitated, ambivalence twisted his gut. After lives spent cutting through tangled wires and circuits, he'd had enough time to relish being just George. Curiosity nagged at him, pulling him across the line. He took a breath and answered. The urgency in Jonathan's voice was unmistakable. "George, I need your help with an electrical issue at my home." Before he could question the why, he found himself agreeing, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. This unpredictable twist of fate held promise. But lingering in his chest was a tightening sensation, choking his instinct to rely on experience over circumstance. When George arrived at Jonathan's sprawling mansion, the size struck him as unwelcome. Comparing his little sanctuary to this opulent behemoth felt wrong. He stepped inside, the grand foyer looming with polished marble floors and extravagant chandeliers, yet all he felt was the spotlights of wealth bearing down on him. Shaking off the chill, he followed Jonathan to a dimly lit study filled with the quiet hum of malfunctioning circuitry. As he worked, the tension between them unfurled, a tension thicker than the wires he manipulated. Jonathan's eyes flickered with something that felt more profound than concern over faulty lighting. It was an unspoken vulnerability that spoke of battles yet to confront. With each question he asked about George's life, George felt a mirror hold up to his own. There were shadows in Jonathan's story, whispers of a father who reveled in success while his child bore its burdens. A flood of fragmented memories surged through George, a time when his own family faced betrayal, a stain that never fully washed away. The hope of justice had escaped him, leaving aching scars, and yet, as he looked into Jonathan's eyes, he sensed a glimmer of something both fragile and familiar, a desire for redemption. Should he peel away his protective layer of self-preservation to reach out? Would opening that door lead to a greater understanding, or would it expose him to despair all over again? Caught in the swirling conflict of connection and fear, George felt the mounting pressure close in. Would he step into the burgeoning bond with Jonathan, embracing the unsettling complexities of loyalty, privilege, and forgiveness? What if, behind these walls, injustices awaited disclosure, realities that could fracture the foundation he had built? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the details of Jonathan's family trauma unfolded, the weight of history pressed relentlessly at George's shoulders. Each passing moment thrummed with a growing desperation, their wounds intertwined, and he was left grappling with inheriting someone else's grief. Should he lend his strength to this man seeking redemption, or would holding on to his past serve as a shield against familiar pain? Lost in his tangled thoughts, George cleared his throat, feeling nerves tingle in his fingertips. The uncharted waters of their defiance against legacy beckoned. Yet just as the air felt electrified with possibility, the shadows, lurking behind the glittering facade of luxury, shuddered into focus, unveiling secrets that could uproot everything George thought he knew. His heartbeat drowned in uncertainty. A choice loomed ahead, and every instinct warned him of danger. Would he step back or step forward, knowing the delicate ground could shatter any moment? In this instant, surrounded by echoing histories, George drew a breath, life narrowing to a singular truth. Forces of loyalty and justice danced precariously, straddling the line between salvation and betrayal. The decisions swirled around George like a tempest, the weight of his past grounding him, while the call for action stirred an eagerness to engage. Everything he had built in his life was rooted in self-preservation. The thought of intertwining his fate with Jonathan's was unthinkable, yet the connection tugged at him. He cleared his throat again, almost ready to voice the unspoken bond burgeoning between them. But instead, he busied himself with the circuits and wires, letting his hands guide him through the chaos. As George tightened the last screw in the circuit box, he glanced at Jonathan, who sat perched anxiously on the edge of a leather chair, his brow knitted in thought. There was an urgency in Jonathan's demeanor, a need that transcended mere electrical issues. It was the look of a man burdened by legacy and expectation, shadowed by doubt. "Did you ever think about what it means to carry another's pain?" Jonathan broke the silence, his voice low but steady. George instinctively bristled at the question, recognizing it for what it was, a rejection of the stoic reserve he had built around himself. "Sometimes pain is heavy enough for one," he replied, mindful to keep his tone neutral. Jonathan's gaze pierced through him, unfurling layers of anguish that George both recognized and cringed away from. "I've spent my life trying to escape my father's shadow, building my empire while feeling nothing but emptiness. All the while I've pushed everyone away." His voice trembled slightly with revelation. "And now, I don't even know how to create the connections I crave. I need someone, He looked down, the armor of wealth shattering as he lowered his barriers. In that moment, George saw an opportunity flicker into existence, a chance for both men to confront their demons. "Let me tell you something," George started, his own hidden fears emerging. "Pain can either be a shackle or a blueprint for change. You can choose how to build from it, but that requires facing it head-on, not running from it." Jonathan lifted his gaze, the weight of his expectations still evident, but mingled with an ember of possibility. "You're right, aren't you?" He leaned forward, the chasm of their disparate lives narrowing just slightly. "You're a retired electrician, but you clearly know how to fix much more than electrical circuits." George swallowed hard, aware of the truth beneath Jonathan's words. He had spent years avoiding his own broken connections, cloaking himself in the fabric of routine. Here was a chance, a new path unfolding, and perhaps a way to redeem not just Jonathan's despair, but his own. "I've been reluctant," George admitted, vulnerability slipping past his defenses. "The truth is, I gave up on the idea of making real change in my life a long time ago. Maybe it's time for both of us to consider what stepping out of the shadows looks like." With each word, the doubts that had plagued George for years felt lighter. The thrill of potential coursed through him as he recognized something crucial. They were both architects of their destinies, capable of constructing bridges instead of walls. "What if we worked on something together?" Jonathan suggested quietly, his eyes lighting up with inspiration. "People are going to need to hear our stories, the complexities, the struggles. Maybe strength lies not just in success, but admitting our vulnerabilities." The idea resonated intensely within George. He could feel the stirrings of acknowledgement blooming, an understanding that accepting their shared burdens could carve a path brighter than he had ever envisaged. As they exchanged tentative smiles, George felt something shift within him, a burgeoning drive to grow beyond tired notions of limitation. The tension loomed, anticipation thickening the air. Would they dare channel their pain into a message powerful enough to evoke change? As Jonathan voiced plans to transform their pain into purpose, George caught a glimpse of a future more radiant than he believed possible. The road ahead felt daunting, but for the first time in years, purpose sparked in his heart, urging him forward. But just as a glimmer of hope flickered, a sharp knock at the door interrupted the quiet resolve between them. George's heart raced with new trepidation. Who could be interrupting this moment? As Jonathan opened the door, the looming figure of a man in an impeccably tailored suit stood silhouetted in the entrance, an air of confrontation palpable around him. Who was this newcomer, and what storm would he bring? George's breath quickened, a chilling realization seeping through the room. The journey for redemption was about to face its first formidable challenge. George's instincts surged, each heartbeat echoing his anticipation as he tried to read the man's posture. There was an air of authority about him, a confidence that exuded menace rather than reassurance. The tailored suit suggested wealth, but it was the smirk barely contained beneath his professionally maintained facade that made George's skin prickle. "Jonathan," he began, his voice smooth but edged with purpose, "we need to talk." The tension soared. George felt his earlier resolve teetering, a precarious tightrope strung between confrontation and retreat. He couldn't understand the stranger's authority, but the resolute shudders running through Jonathan suggested he had walked a similar path before, a path George had always dodged. "Can't this wait?" Jonathan's tone was clipped, frustration surfacing. The man remained unmoved. "It won't. You've been avoiding your responsibilities long enough, and now—" He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "It's time you face the consequences." George's pulse quickened, the weight of the stranger's words anchoring him to the moment. Was Jonathan truly as ensnared in his legacy as he'd claimed? Or was there more at play? He reflected on what he now realized. Both of them had crafted lives steeped in self-preservation, but this unexpected confrontation pricked at the illusion of safety they had built. "What consequences?" Jonathan shot back, the bite of his words faltering under the weight of unease. George noticed that Jonathan's hands clenched into fists on his knees. There was a flicker of fear behind Jonathan's bravado that mirrored his own internal turmoil. He turned his focus inward, questioning what had drawn him into this situation. The thought of assisting Jonathan had roped George into a complexity he had sought to avoid. "Let's not pretend this is about a simple conversation," the man replied, hands folding across his chest. "You owe your father the legacy he built for you, and you've been squandering it." Jonathan inhaled sharply, color draining from his face. The confrontation illuminated a truth George feared. This thread of familial obligation could unravel them both. The implications hung heavy, suffocating. George gripped the armrest of the chair, feeling the texture biting into his palms as thoughts cascaded through his mind. He needed to act. But how? Should he allow Jonathan to face this burden alone? The urge to intervene quaked under his skin. "Why are you here?" Jonathan asked, the bravado faltering once more. There was an edge of vulnerability in his voice that coaxed forth George's protective instincts. "What makes you think I owe you anything?" "Because," the man retorted coolly, "the empire you built is at stake. If you refuse to acknowledge your path, it all disappears into the shadows." Jonathan's fear morphed into anger, and for a moment George could see old shields rising. Yet the armor was fragile, breeding uncertainty. Jonathan was a product of his history, entangled in relentless expectations. The confrontation was forcing both of them into an introspective reckoning. Something shifted in George, a flicker of agency sparking within him. "You don't define him," he spoke up, surprising himself with the depth of his conviction. "The choices he makes now, those are his own. Burdens do not have to be carried alone." The unexpected clarity in George's words hung in the air like a challenge, stirring a stronger confrontation, both physical and emotional. The atmosphere pulsed with tension as he felt newfound resolve coursing through him. He was no longer just a retired electrician. He was a man confronting the ghosts of his own past alongside Jonathan. But before more could unfold, the stranger's facade cracked, revealing a flash of annoyance that seemed to signal deeper stakes were at play. "Your little project is naive. You'll need much more than inspiration to face the world." As the man closed the door behind him, George turned to Jonathan, steeling himself against the weight of the storm ahead. They were only just beginning this venture, the initial threads of their connection still woven tight, but the threat of external forces loomed ominously above them. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" George couldn't help but whisper, doubt swirling like residue. Jonathan's eyes bore the same question, intensity flaring as their gazes connected, and while uncertainty threatened to pull them apart, a seed of resolve sprouted from within. They were standing at the precipice of their defining moment, the allure of transformation beckoning them forward. But the haunting thought lingered: what other monsters lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to strike when they least expected it? George felt the air in the room thicken with impending conflict. The urgency of the moment pressed against him like a vice, and the weight of Jonathan's uncertainty reflected back at him. As he navigated through the chaos of their exchange, he realized this confrontation was a crossroads for both of them. His instinct told him that the stakes were higher than the simple familial legacy they spoke of, a truth cloaked in secrecy and defiance. "Perhaps it's time to stop dodging our responsibilities," George said, his voice steadier than he felt. With each word, he discovered not only a new courage, but a sense of purpose. Who was he to lecture? A retired electrician who had spent years avoiding the mess of his own life while fixing others. Jonathan's glare held a mixture of gratitude and resistance. "Easy to say when you aren't standing in the crosshairs," he spat, yet there was a vulnerability hidden beneath his bravado. George could sense Jonathan's internal battle, an urgent plea masked by resentment. "I might not know your demons," George admitted, "but I know the heaviness of ignorance. It's suffocating." Their gazes mingled, an unspoken understanding blossoming between them. It was a moment of clarity. It became evident that they were both prisoners of expectation, George through a lifetime of retreat, and Jonathan through the unyielding grip of legacy. "What if we faced that weight together?" George offered. The proposition felt reckless, but it thrummed with potential. They didn't have to shoulder their burdens single-handedly. Could connection offer them both solace, a way to disentangle the chains they forged from obligation? Jonathan's expression softened ever so slightly. "You don't know what you're asking," he warned, yet his resistance waned. "Actually, I think I do," George countered. "I've spent too many years ignoring the confines of my own life. I went quiet when I wasn't supposed to. But maybe it's time to speak up and act on something real." As Jonathan absorbed George's words, the silence stretched between them, pregnant with possibility. The door that the stranger had slammed shut felt like a pivot, a demand for both men to either stand still or dare to step into the open. "Are you really ready for that?" Jonathan finally asked, doubt seeping into his voice. A fresh wave of determination surged within George. This would not just be Jonathan's fight, it was a chance for them both. "I've walked away from too much for far too long. If you need a partner, I'm willing, but you have to be willing to open the door fully." That bold admission flicked an internal switch for George. He sensed a reservoir of strength inside him he had forgotten, an ember capable of igniting something greater than himself. He remembered how, in the electrifying days of his former career, he had thrived in the mix of wiring, troubleshooting, and redemption. He had a gift for assembling systems. Perhaps this was no different. Jonathan considered it, vulnerability creeping into his professional stoicism. Each second weighed heavily, the shadows around them thick with tension. "This isn't just about my father's empire," he said quietly. "This is about tearing down the walls we've both carefully built. It's scary." "Good," George responded without hesitation. Fear can be a powerful motivator. As their agreement began to solidify, the room felt lighter, as if cracks in their previous confinement had allowed light to spill in. Their conversation unfurled like a complicated wire coil, messy, but filled with potential. Just then, Jonathan's phone pinged, a jarring sound against the newfound harmony. He reached for it, increasingly hesitant, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon him. The screen illuminated his face, and George noticed the tension return instantly, a frown knitting on Jonathan's brow. "It's an unknown number," he muttered, practically mouthing the words, a growing dread creeping in. "Answer it," George urged, ignoring his own misgivings. Jonathan hesitated, the atmosphere electric with uncertainty. Could this call usher in clarity or further complications? As he pressed the button to answer, George's pulse quickened, aware that whatever lay on the other end would shape their journey forward. "What if it's another threat?" Jonathan whispered just before the line connected. "Then we'll face it, together," George replied, heart racing. While he grappled with his own fears, George's world opened into a vast potential. As Jonathan's eyes flickered to the screen, George readied himself for a revelation that could reshape everything. With each pulse of the phone, fate edged closer, pushing boundaries they both needed to confront. What would this call reveal? And how would it alter the precarious balance of their newfound alliance? Jonathan's thumb hovered above the screen, uncertainty etched across his features. The ringtone faded into the air, merging with the ambient hum of the city outside. George, standing beside him, felt an instinctive tightening in his chest. This moment, this decision, was vital. The unknown number loomed larger than just an intrusion. It threatened their fragile connection. "Just answer it," George urged with a steady resolve. His own heart thundered in response to the tension pervasive in the room. What needed to click into place could only do so with Jonathan taking this step. With a decisive breath, Jonathan pressed the button to accept the call. "Hello," he said, his tone a wary mixture of expectation and dread. Silence flooded the space. George watched his face pale, his eyes tightening as he listened, reading depth into the creases around Jonathan's mouth. George felt drawn into the moment. This was not just about Jonathan anymore. He realized he was witnessing a metamorphosis, one that might very well redefine both men. As Jonathan's expression shifted from confusion to horror, George mentally prepared himself for what was to come, steeling against the weight of Jonathan's fears, reflecting his own. "Who are you?" Jonathan suddenly barked, anger rising through the confusion. George sensed the shift in Jonathan's demeanor, interpreting it as a confrontation of years of built-up resentment, a fight against curses inherited but never asked for. He admired Jonathan's vehemence. While his past revolved around suppressing these feelings, Jonathan seemed poised to challenge them head-on. The voice on the other end, muffled and distant, flashed an urgency. Jonathan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone tighter, pulling George further into the storm. Although he could not hear the words, Jonathan's body language translated the turmoil, a mixture of indignation, fear, and a flicker of hope. Then the conversation took a turn. Jonathan's tone softened, just a touch, as he processed the revelation. "I see," he murmured, his brow furrowing deeper. Instinctively, George leaned closer, eager to glean the gravity of the words spoken, even if they remained just out of reach. Another pause, and then, "Why now?" Jonathan questioned, his voice cracking slightly. George felt the shift beneath the surface, a fracture opening between their pasts and a potential future laden with risks and rewards. It was a pivotal moment, and in it, George discerned Jonathan's struggle to break free from the tight grip of legacy, to choose his path. With Jonathan engaged in heated discussion, George's thoughts raced. He tapped into his past experiences, reflecting on his own years of conflict when faced with far greater challenges than electrical grids. The silent battles of regret, desperation, and choices that shaped his life. He felt a magnetism toward the energy his companion exuded now. Jonathan needed reassurance that they could navigate uncharted waters together, just like the complex circuits George had once wired. As the call concluded, Jonathan's expression morphed from anger to contemplation. He hung up abruptly, his breathing heavy. "It's my father. They've been hiding things, serious things," he finally admitted, the resolve draining from his posture. "He's facing threats, George. Big ones." "What type of threats?" George pressed, not letting the gravity slip away. This revelation was the door they spoke of, the catalyst for a shared journey, and he instinctively knew that it was time to act, not merely react. "The kind that make all of this," Jonathan gestured around him, "seem trivial. They're after the company, and it seems my father won't give up on the legacy without a fight." George felt his pulse quicken again. This was the moment of reckoning, a challenge that made them both question everything they prioritized, their positions as mere pawns in someone else's game. "Then we have to get ahead of this. But that means we'll need a plan," George urged, driven by a newfound mission. The feeling of assertiveness surged within him. He wouldn't slip back into the shadows this time. Jonathan nodded slowly, determination igniting. "You're right. I can't do this alone. We need to leverage what we have, networking, resources, strategy, and I need to step into my role, as daunting as it is." George's heart swelled. This partnership held immense potential, a true alliance formed from shared vulnerabilities. Yet lurking beneath their resolve was a palpable tension. Jonathan's vulnerability felt like both a weapon and a shield. Could he withstand the fallout from facing his father at this critical moment? And what future implications would arise if they succeeded, or worse, if they failed? "Let's start mapping out a plan then," Jonathan said, the clench in his jaw signaling readiness for action. "First, we need to know more about this threat." As they strategized, a thought nagged at George. Was he truly prepared to dismantle not just the barriers between them, but those surrounding the legacy that haunted Jonathan daily? This new battle was undeniably intertwined with his own unrecognizable fears. The stakes were rising, and as George looked into Jonathan's eyes, he realized they both teetered on the edge of profound transformations. Just then, Jonathan's phone buzzed again, a second alert meant to unravel their emerging plan. "What now?" George asked, dread creeping into his tone as they both stared at the screen. Would it be the continuation of a crisis, or perhaps an opportunity that would shatter their reformed bonds? Jonathan stared at the screen, apprehension clawing at his insides. The unknown number blinked as if challenging him to embrace whatever lay ahead. This was no ordinary call. It was a continuation of the storm swirling around his father's legacy and the fractured relationship that had defined his life. "Should I answer?" he asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. George met his gaze, sensing both the fear and the unmistakable urge to confront the demons lurking within. "What do you think?" George replied, a hint of encouragement lighting his tone. The call could either deepen the rift or become a defining moment for Jonathan, a chance to regain control over his story. Taking a deep breath, Jonathan swiped to answer. "Hello," he said, a slight edge betraying his calm facade. The voice on the other end was foreign, yet filled with urgency. For a moment, Jonathan felt the world blur outside. It was just him and this call, each word like a step deeper into uncharted territory. As Jonathan listened, his expression fluctuated between shock and determination. Each revelation laced with hidden dangers turned his unease into a burgeoning resolve. There was so much more at stake than mere financial security. The threats encompassed legacy, identity, and the looming shadow of his father's choices. Assassination attempts, Jonathan echoed incredulously, his heart racing. "You're serious?" George observed the transformation happening before him. The uncertainty that had once gripped Jonathan began to dissolve, replaced by a fierce clarity. After hanging up, Jonathan turned to George, adrenaline coursing through him. "We can't just sit back. If they want my father, they're going to come for me too. I need to protect the company and find out who's really behind this." "Where do we start?" George asked, gauging Jonathan's readiness. The fervor etched into Jonathan's features spoke volumes. "I've always let my father run things. I've stayed in the background," Jonathan admitted, his voice low but resolute. "But now, I have to confront not just him, but the enemies lurking in the shadows. It's time I step up, even if it means facing him." George felt a tingle of excitement and apprehension. "This is your chance, Jonathan. You've been holding back for too long. This is your moment for growth." They plunged into planning, the once unmoored intentions coalescing into a tangible strategy. With every brainstorming session, Jonathan began to redefine what it meant to lead. Resources turned from abstract concepts into actionable items. Networking wasn't merely about connections, but about fostering new allies in an uncertain world. He pulled up maps of their competitors, outlining potential risks with laser focus. George interjected with insights from his own experience, tools and tactics that shaped their defense strategy, balancing Jonathan's impending confrontation with his father's legacy while securing the company's future. Yet the more Jonathan leaned into his new role, the sharper the apprehension grew about the consequences. What would it signify if he outshone his father? Was the fracture between them irreparable? In the myriad of thoughts, one narrative surfaced. The fight was no longer solely against external threats, but an internal battle as well. Could he embrace his identity on his terms, or would he forever remain a reflection in his father's shadow? As night fell, weariness set in, but determination consumed him. "Let's finalize what we know and strategize for face-to-face meetings," Jonathan declared. "We can't allow complacency to overshadow action." The looming tension was palpable, while throughout the shadows lurked doubt. George nodded in agreement, yet the underlying question remained. Was Jonathan truly ready to step toward this personal and professional upheaval? As they sifted through notes and reached for solutions, Jonathan's phone buzzed again, a message illuminating the screen. It was a reminder of a meeting with his father. The gravity of the impending confrontation loomed larger than ever, leaving both men to ponder what the repercussions would entail. "Are you ready for this?" George asked, the edge of hesitation palpable in the air. "I don't have a choice," Jonathan replied, a resolute fire igniting in his eyes. "I finally own my narrative." But as they prepared for battle, the question remained. Would his transformation lead to empowerment, or merely serve as the prelude to an inevitable showdown that could change everything? The sun crested the horizon, casting a pale light through the office window. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, tension thrumming beneath his skin, mingling with the remnants of last night's adrenaline. The weight of his father's impending visit hung in the air, a heavy fog that threatened to choke the newfound resolve he had fought so hard to cultivate. He reviewed their strategy documents, each point punctuating what stood on the verge of collapse: his father's empire, their fractured relationship, and most importantly, his own place in the story. Questions raced through his mind. Would his father even recognize the man sitting before him, or was he just a reminder of choices unmet? "Think of it as practice," George said, his keen eyes studying Jonathan. "An opportunity to showcase not just your ideas, but who you are becoming." Jonathan nodded, absorbing the encouragement, yet uncertainty gnawed at him. He had always held back, allowing others to dictate the narrative. But now, as he prepared to chain pivotal discussions, he discovered that a simple mindset shift was inadequate. Embracing his voice would require a strategic confrontation, both with his father and his self-doubt. As the clock neared the hour of the meeting, Jonathan's heart raced. What if he dismisses what I've accomplished? What if I stutter under the pressure? He voiced, his vulnerability raw. Then you pivot, George stated matter-of-factly. You've crafted your perspective with purpose. Remember that this isn't just about him. It's also about your emergence. You need to stand for yourself. Nodding slowly, Jonathan considered that for a moment. Could he truly embrace both confrontation and revelation without losing himself? He inhaled deeply, testing the air for courage. He envisioned the room, his father's imposing figure dominating the space, yet he imagined himself stronger, grounded. When his father entered, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The old man wore the weight of years, like armor, yet his eyes flickered with shades of disappointment and calculation. The opening greeting was perfunctory, a necessary ritual that masked the thorns within their complex relationship. "Jonathan," his father began, a note of condescension almost tangible, "I trust we'll have a productive discussion today." The underlying message stung. This was a chance to prove that Jonathan had not only a stake in the business, but could command his narrative, reshaping their legacy. "I hope so too, Dad." Jonathan's voice held a firmness that surprised him. "There are some urgent matters we need to address regarding the company and the threats we face." Surprise flickered across his father's face. He was accustomed to being the authority, the central figure in both business and family. But Jonathan had dug deep to uncover his own authority, refusing to let the legacy of his father overshadow his capabilities. The conversation unfolded like a tightly wound dance, each accusation and counterpoint revealing the foundations of their relationship, fragile yet resilient. Jonathan articulated his visions for using their resources, stresses on innovation, and veering away from legacy conservation while demonstrating readiness to confront external foes. The conversation was turbulent, sparking both familiar arguments and unexpected alliances. "Maybe you're right," his father begrudgingly acknowledged after a tense silence, "but you need to understand the implications of battling the past." In that moment, Jonathan felt a flicker of authority resonate within him. The words settled around them like a catalyst. He wasn't merely reiterating old arguments, he was confronting the essence of their legacy, both the uplifting and the destructive. As the meeting concluded, Jonathan realized the confrontation had reshaped not just his father's view of him, but his own understanding of leadership. He might not have won every point, but he had embarked upon a journey of spatial dominance in their dialogue, forming a new narrative where he existed on his terms. Yet the looming threats remained, looming larger and darker than the shadows cast throughout the office. Confronting his father had unlocked a new level of conflict, but it also sparked a new flame of determination within him. Who were the enemies they needed to confront next? Would this delicate balance of newfound authority survive the chaos that lay ahead? As he stepped out of the office, determined yet anxious, Jonathan received a notification, an anonymous email with a cryptic subject line, "The game has just begun." Jonathan stared at the screen, heart pounding as the words, "The game has just begun," etched themselves into his mind, piercing through the fog of uncertainty that had settled after the meeting. Who would send such a message? Gripped by a surge of urgency, he clicked open the email. It was bare, simply containing a single line, "Meet me tomorrow at the old diner, midnight." His curiosity was eclipsed by questions. Was it a threat, a warning, or an opportunity? Regardless, it felt like a mutation of the defiance he'd just discovered within himself. The resolve he had woven during his confrontation with his father seemed fragile in the shadow of an unknown adversary. The hours leading up to midnight stretched interminably. Jonathan's thoughts bounced back to the meeting. The glimmers of newfound authority felt tenacious, yet the email conjured insecurities that clung to him like old memories. Was he prepared for this next phase? Confronting his father was one thing. A hidden enemy was another beast entirely. That night, as he drove toward the diner, he wrestled with the auguries of his past. Each junction felt like a decision point in life. Was he stepping towards empowerment or recklessness? The neon lights flickered overhead, casting unsettling shadows on the back roads. He was stepping outside of his comfort zone, shattering the silence that had previously tethered him to his father's expectations. Upon arrival, the diner appeared nearly abandoned, its windows smeared against the night, only the sound of the fan inside breaking the eerie silence. The clattering of dishes echoed in the small space, amplifying the unnatural quiet. Jonathan's heart raced as he stepped inside. He spotted an old man in the corner booth, his rugged hands folded over a chipped coffee mug. With silver hair and a face lined with years of experience, he was a stranger but radiated familiarity, like someone who had been a witness to countless stories, both triumphant and tragic. "You're Jonathan," the man stated, eyes narrowing. He nodded, cautious. "And you are?" "I'm someone who knows your father's business." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "And the troubles all around it." Each word felt like a dissection of the tension from earlier, plunging Jonathan back into the weight of familial legacy and impending threats. "I wasn't aware that my father had enemies." "What do you know?" The man chuckled, dry and bitter. "You think running that empire is simply business? It's a web. Friends and foes are defined differently in that game. Your father's decisions carved a path that left scars. Some people don't forget. But he's not the only one in danger. You are too. If you want your place in this legacy, you'll have to navigate through shadows." Jonathan felt the gravity of those words settle like lead in his stomach. Shadows? Navigating? The same instincts that had driven him to confront his father now felt inadequate against this treacherous underbelly. "And what do you gain from this?" "Let's just say I have my own scores to settle, and your father's downfall may provide opportunity for both of us." The ambiguity gnawed at Jonathan's determination, forcing a critical reflection. Was he prepared to leverage his father's vulnerabilities in order to fortify his own place in the world? The decision weighed heavily inside his chest, the potential corruption of priorities looming closer. "Do you believe I can contend with my father's legacy, even amidst chaos?" Jonathan questioned, his voice firm but tinged with doubt. The man regarded him keenly, as if appraising the metal of a young blade. "It depends on how far you're willing to go. The question is simple. Are you ready to fight for what's yours, even when the threats seem insurmountable?" As the diner faded into the background, Jonathan's mind raced, caught in a maelstrom of ambition and trepidation. He had not only to confront the looming threats outside, but those within, the choices he had yet to make. The night had become a crucible, testing him under pressure against both known and unknown foes. Lifting his head, ready to confront whatever shadows lay ahead, he realized that this was no longer about simply proving himself to his father. It was about fortifying his identity in a world laced with hidden dangers. But as he emerged into the midnight air, one thought lingered in his mind. Who else lay in wait, and what game was truly afoot? The time had come to face more than family discussions. A new reality awaited on the horizon. Jonathan barely slept that night, haunted by the old man's words. Shadows cloaked his thoughts, and uncertainty gnawed at his resolve. He needed clarity and a plan, both to confront his father and to face this new threat. As dawn broke, he opened his laptop, scanning old emails and documents related to his father's business. Digging through family records felt like unearthing buried treasure, but mixed with tar. Every discovery was both enlightening and disheartening. The day progressed with a restless energy, each hour ticking slowly as he pieced together his father's empire. There were acquisitions, mergers, losses that drilled deeper than he anticipated. Jonathan logged everything meticulously, trying to recognize patterns where he might act. It was his first flutter into the realm of strategy, plotting a course that could potentially set him apart from his father's shadow. In a moment of haste, Jonathan reached out for a friend who had a reputation for being adept in navigating undercurrents. Mia, a sharp-minded analyst who specialized in market dynamics. They agreed to meet in a nearby cafe, the buzz of conversations ebbing into a backdrop. When Mia arrived, her eyebrows raised at the urgency in Jonathan's demeanor. "What's going on?" she asked, concern etching her features as she slid into the booth opposite him. "Do you remember those whispers about my father's business dealings? I think there's more to the stories." Jonathan leaned in, urgency fueling his voice. "I need your help to navigate them." She hesitated, contemplating his words carefully. "You know it can get messy, right? Your dad's legacy is laden with high stakes." "I'll do whatever it takes," he replied, voice steadier than he felt. "There are pulses I need to measure, relationships I need to explore. I want to uncover the vulnerabilities. I need to understand this world." Mia regarded him with respect and a hint of wariness. "Fine, but we must tread lightly. You might uncover more than you expect." As they sifted through data, articles and whispers, Jonathan's analytical prowess emerged. He unraveled intricate connections, revealing factions within his father's company, unsanctioned operations, risky contracts. Each discovery fueled a mix of empowerment and dread. He was absorbing the darkness he hoped to conquer. After hours of research, Jonathan emerged from the cafe, recommitted but daunted. The stakes were high, and the shadows loomed larger than before. With a growing sense of identity separate from his father, he realized he now stood at a crossroads. Forge ahead in pursuit of power, or draw back and preserve innocence? This question felt like a heavy burden pressing him, sowing doubt within that he needed to silence. The sun sank lower, casting lengthening shadows of truth that stretched toward him. He had to confront his father about the discoveries. There was a need for truth, a rebalancing of their dynamics. That evening, he made the call, despite the cold sweat trickling down the back of his neck. "Dad, we need to talk. There's more going on than you've led me to believe." The silence on the other end was palpable. What had he unlocked? What kind of truth awaited him? His father's wrath, or perhaps an unexpected vulnerability? But before John could wonder further, a sharp knock startled him from his thoughts. He opened the door, surprised to find Mia standing there, breathless and wide-eyed. "I just got something. A tip about your father's biggest deal yet. You need to see this." As Jonathan's heart raced at the prospect, a new urgency loomed larger than ever. Whatever was unraveling had only just begun, and he was now tethered to its chaos. Where would it lead him? The days following that fateful meeting blurred into a whirlwind of relentless urgency. Jonathan felt the intoxicating pull of potential. Each revelation about his father's business practices had ignited a fire within him, a compulsion to claim his birthright, but on his own terms. No longer merely a reflection of his father, he was emerging from a long shadow, a phoenix yearning to rise. With Mia by his side, they meticulously organized their research. The clandestine meetings with former associates of his father became a steady routine. They pieced together tales of mismanagement and betrayal, shadows lurking behind the successes Jonathan had once admired from afar. Every recording, every detail, whispered a path toward transformation. The duality of privilege and peril was laid bare, ready for them to tackle head-on. As their investigations deepened, Jonathan reached out during the evenings to George. Their connection had grown, evolving from mere camaraderie to a profound understanding. Late-night calls were filled with brainstorming, discussions of power dynamics, and strategies on how to navigate the treacherous waters of corporate warfare. "George," Jonathan spoke one night, the glow of the laptop illuminating his determined face. "This isn't just about me confronting my father anymore. It's about laying a foundation for something greater. We can redefine this legacy, bring transparency back to our dealings, solidify the business by erasing the shadows." George's voice came through the phone, steady and reassuring. "You're seeing it, Jonathan. You are not only reclaiming your narrative, you're also reclaiming your father's legacy from his own missteps. But this journey isn't easy. Be prepared for backlash." Jonathan's face hardened with resolve. He was aware that storms lay ahead. He would have to confront not just his father, but the business tycoons and shadowy figures that had long dwelled in the opacity of corruption. It was a delicate balance of power, and he was prepared to rise or fall on this precipice of truth. The day arrived when he felt ready to engage. A board meeting was scheduled, where critical discussions over the company's future and the impending threats loomed. As Jonathan entered, the familiar tension washed over him. His father, a fountain of experience and intimidation, sat at the helm, flanked by executives who had always parroted his narratives. Yet today, Jonathan carried an energy dissimilar to any he had before. Raw confidence grounded in newfound conviction. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the room, slicing through the air thick with apprehension. "We need to address the recent findings regarding our dealings, specifically the emerging competitors and the strategies that have been jeopardizing our core values." Eyes shifted, uncertainty danced among the ranks of executives. The silence thickened. Jonathan pierced through it with unwavering determination. He called forth representatives from previous clients who had bolted because of unethical practices, an echo of lost business that fortified his argument. He stood firmly, emotions rising beneath the surface. It was no longer the shadow of his father's empire he wielded, but a sincere ambition to build something anew. "Jonathan," his father finally interjected, an air of dismissal heavy on his words, "you underestimate the complexities here. You think you can waltz in and change everything? This is about survival." The moment felt potent. Jonathan met his father's gaze directly. "No, Dad, it's about accountability. Survival shouldn't just stem from profit margins. It should reflect integrity." Gasps filled the room. Members of the board trading glances as Jonathan pressed forward. He outlined his plan for revamping the company's dealings, reiterating that transparency and strong ethics should govern strategy moving forward. Each step he took underscored his transformation. He had evolved from a boy seeking approval to a man demanding respect. As the meeting reached its climax, Jonathan found himself beckoning courage from the depths of his being. He expressed the need for collective ownership, not just from the board, but across all levels of the company. It was audacious, but poised to redefine the structure entirely. After the meeting, as echoes of half-hearted applause faded, Jonathan felt liberated yet exposed. "You did it," Mia told him as they stood outside the boardroom, her voice laced with admiration. "I couldn't have without your insights," he replied, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. "But what's next? There are still unseen dangers lurking." Amid their plans and victories, they knew one truth. The uncovering of shadows was only the beginning. The unseen enemies that had sent anonymous threats were still at large, and their web linked back to the core of his father's legacy. This fight was not something merely outlined in business papers. It reeked of insecurity deeply etched in personal history. Back at home, Jonathan paced, contemplating his next steps. As he analyzed every risk and reality, he recalled the old man's words, the shadows he had run from all his life. But now, with every conflict faced, he had commuted a definitive shift in his story, proving that confronting the past meant sculpting the future. George called just then, breaking through Jonathan's moment of reflection. "How are you holding up?" he asked, aware of the nature of the day's events. "I took the first step forward. I confronted my father." Jonathan paused, feeling the weight of his own words. The release enveloped him, transformed anguish into triumph. "Good," George replied, a note of pride resonating in his voice. "Remember, confidence breeds clarity. You stepped out of his shadow, even if just for a moment. Don't dwell in the past. It's crafted who you are, but it doesn't dictate your future." Jonathan smiled quietly, the depths of understanding settling within him. It was time to push forward, unraveling the complexities still nestled among the shards of legacy ahead, while pondering stronger frameworks to enlighten his path. Their fight was far from over, yet he felt empowered for the journey that awaited. The awakening had only just begun. Illuminated by newfound purpose, Jonathan knew this was more than a professional transformation. It was a personal renaissance that would cultivate change and carry him past the demands of history into a horizon that beckoned with promise. This was the moment he had yearned for, a transformative awakening setting the stage for authentic leadership. And as he slumbered that night, the whispers of the past faded, replaced with the quiet hum of possibility. And with each beat of his heart, Jonathan Thompson was no longer merely an heir. He had become the architect of his destiny. Remember, do not wait for more stirring stories of personal achievements and transformative journeys. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and allow others to find this inspiring narrative. Comment your reactions and theories about this thrilling conclusion. And share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this powerful transformation. You need to subscribe now, because this is the moment to show your support for true stories of personal overcoming. Don't wait even one more second to share.